Good to know. So Yasmin is a hard act to follow here, and was characteristically totally on point here. And I just want to preface this by saying that by any other avenue, I think where we're going to end up is actually at a related place, which is a plea for investment in education. So here we are. Let's think a little bit about what we're doing here, devoting our time to this public sharing of exciting ideas, which is obviously pretty awesome. And I really sort of want to preface, I mean, Jay puts this in a wry way, but I do want to preface this by saying that, like, I think it's amazing that you guys have put this together. I think it's marvelous, and that you've taken possession of the organization and that you care about the ideas in this way. It's really kind of wonderful to see this happen. And it's important for me to say this because I'm about to tell you all the things I think that are wrong with TED Talks as a model. So I agreed to do this on the condition that, like, you would know that it wasn't about you guys, but more about the external structures inside of which we are working. And let me just follow that up by saying that students of mine who are here, you all know that I think you're pretty awesome. So let's just put that out there. So what is a TED Talk? Curiously, this is actually a strange context in which to ask this question, because I mean, here we all are all doing them right now together, but we haven't really said that much about what this material always involves. Oddly, we actually have a pretty intuitive knowledge of what that is, both as speakers and as audience members who showed up for this. But let's try to be a little more precise about it so that we can kind of get into what some of the issues are here. The guys who came up with TED Talks conceived of the conference as a public forum for people to talk about capital B, capital I, big ideas in the TED disciplines. That is technology, education, and design. And of course, we know from our own schedule today that those concepts are very broad and that they really are able to sort of incorporate a huge range of interesting topics. I don't know if any of you would fit specifically into those ranges, but we count them in anyway because they're super interesting and they can be kind of merged into those disciplines. But nonetheless, I think we have to acknowledge that if that is the interest of the structure of TED Talks, technology, entertainment, and design, that there's necessarily going to be some ideological underpinnings to what we are doing here, that they are necessarily going to like things that prioritize technology, entertainment, and whatever it is that design is. Which of course can be sort of whatever we want it to be. And that TED Talks are going to like those things, whether they are legitimately likable in a given context or not. So that's sort of my first point, which is that we are coming to this from a non-neutral starting point. But let's get back to the idea of what it means to have a capital B, capital I, big idea. As I think we probably can see from what we've done already today, big ideas can be very, very exciting. Indeed, one of the things I really have loved about teaching at Basis and teaching high school level in general, as a matter of fact, is that what we do here is the big ideas. That is really kind of what our priority is. That this level is about, let's say, opening whole fields of inquiry for students who haven't been exposed to those fields before, and like sending your curiosities into areas where you didn't think that there were areas to go. And that's amazing. That's a wonderful thing for big ideas to do. And it is what we're doing right now. So big ideas are really, really good for sort of opening up curiosity, and as we say, that's why we're here today. However, big ideas have capital B, big disadvantages. They are almost by definition, they obscure the amount of work that is actually necessary to prove or improve anything. That's part of why they're kind of fun and exciting, that they kind of get rid of that piece and get you right to the end. They also necessarily obscure subtleties, which broadly big ideas tend to consider to be small ideas. Nuance is not really available for big ideas, that you need to sort of get rid of all that in order to get to the end point again. And this is, once again, not meant personally, but structurally. Big ideas necessarily also address themselves to a very particular kind of audience. They are a kind of audience that is curious and excited, and which is what we hope obviously the high school student of our dreams is like. Hello, high school students of my dreams. But nonetheless, that is naive about the topic that you are talking about, otherwise you would be at a different kind of talk, and that has the necessary kind of leisure time to hypothesize about that material rather than be engaged in the sort of process of production of work on that particular topic. So these are disadvantages. The combination of these disadvantages inherent in the big idea, capital B, capital I, of TED Talks, tends to produce a virtually identical TED Talk arc. And I think that just having seen Yasmin right now, this was not Yasmin's arc. This is an arc that we see in the sort of public version of the TED Talks conference. And I'm going to just sort of lay this down, and I would ask everybody to sort of reflect on TED Talks we have known and see if this sort of sounds right to you. It's pretty critical, sorry. Here's the arc. A relatively unknown person from a given field says something that is considered radical because it conflicts with the standard body of knowledge from that field, stodgy, old, work-intensive knowledge. Usually, the person is radically oversimplifying the problems inside that field. As we said, big ideas are dependent upon the getting rid of nuances and subtleties. And by doing that, they imply that the field itself had a flaw that was the reason that they thought they had complex problems to begin with, and it was just by coming in and sort of seeing past all that garbage that we could get to the end game. And of course, these two things are extremely entertaining, as TED Talks cares about. I mean, that entertainment is a very good value here. It's part of embedded in the foundational elements. And I would say that, let me just be fair about this, like, I happen to be a Cubs fan. Anybody else in here a Cubs fan?
Yes.
Okay, so you know what it's like to root for the underdog. I mean, I still sort of believe that one day they're going to win the World Series. I don't know why I think that. Right? Wait till next season. Yeah, I mean, the sight of a David killing a Goliath, that is to say a lone sort of unknown in any particular field, slaying the whole body of knowledge in the field, is very exciting and it's very entertaining. But it also isn't real most of the time. So here's the end of the narrative in which we usually see this taking place in the TED Talk, that the person then provides us with some kind of, usually technology-based, utopian solution to all of our worries about that problem. And this is both entertaining in its own right because it's kind of a good punchline, and it's a wonderful sort of reassuring conclusion to what was a complicated story coming to a satisfactory ending. So I'm going to let that narrative settle for a second here. Does that sound familiar a little bit? There's some nods, that's okay. I'm going to say it's familiar to me. This is how I experience the way that this tends to be structured in the public forum. And this is what I think is the result of this fascination with the capital B, capital I, big idea. So the real problem here is that the big idea is a myth. It's not a real thing. That doesn't exist. Knowledge and even ideas themselves develop through unbelievable quantities of work and time, and I'm going to come back to this point, and this is a shout out to Yasmin in part right here. They require huge amounts of public investment of all levels, money, time, interest, etc., etc. The fixation on the big idea is reminiscent for me of an accusation that is lobbied against intellectual research all over the place, but also in particular against the humanities, which is the area I'm most familiar with. And the accusation is basically this, that knowledge and solutions in that area, in whatever area it is, are being purposefully, or at least negligently, obscured by the people who work in that field so as to keep regular people like us out. That we have come up with a kind of intellectual language and made these problems seem really complex so as to keep other people locked out of the ivory tower. Obviously that's bad, but I don't think that's really what's going on here by and large. I think there's some truth to that, but I don't think it's really the issue. I think it's an expectation that comes up in a post-Malcolm Gladwell generation, and I should say, just a little self-disclosure here, I have a personal beef with Malcolm Gladwell because he took some of my father's research and did this thing I'm about to say to it. We have an expectation that everything should be able to fit into a punchy little soundbite. That really, ultimately, what constitutes a good, big idea is something that can be expressed more or less in the size of a bumper sticker. A slight long bumper sticker in some cases, but nonetheless a bumper sticker. Real knowledge just doesn't work this way. Soundbites are perfect for certain contexts, and one of those contexts, I would argue, is high school, where you are expanding your field of questions. That is what we do here. We open up the questions, and that's awesome. There's nothing wrong with big ideas and soundbited big things for that purpose. The problem is that soundbites don't provide answers. That they are great for questions, terrible for answers. And answers are they're never unique, they're never neat, they're never easy to get to, and they're never utopian. They're always complicated. So the problem with TED Talks, I guess, is a thing for me, is not so much that they exist, but that they don't say that they're providing questions. What they say they're doing is providing answers. And that just seems categorically misplaced to me. I'd like to correlate this problem. This is sort of an aside, but I'm going to wrap it back around. To what I see as a real crisis in higher education, that has been developing in the course of the last few decades. And this is the idea that university students are not actually students, as we formerly thought that they were, but they're actually customers. This is an odd configuration. Has anybody heard that configuration before? Yeah, it sounds kind of intuitive, and there's a level at which this does make some superficial sense, because they are paying a great deal for the service that they are being provided. They absolutely do have a right to expect exemplary teaching and exemplary research opportunities and exemplary experiences overall. They totally have a right to expect those things. And they really do need the credentials that are being provided to them by having this experience. So the model goes, thus they are, in essence, credentials customers. I think this is totally, totally wrong. I think it gets totally wrong what being a student is and what knowledge is and what those things are actually for. If students are customers, and as we know, customers are always right, then mainly what customers want are entertaining big ideas. Not hard, complicated work that it actually takes to really understand something in a deep way. Let's just imagine this at the kind of disadvantage here. Like, what if a class demands something that is very important but is nonetheless disquieting to one of the students, or is just simply outright hard? Does that mean that we shouldn't teach it because it's not a good, entertaining, consumable, consumer is always right punchline? I don't think we should interpret students as customers for that reason. I think it leads us to bad places. In the same way that students shouldn't be customers, nor knowledge shouldn't have to be entertainment. It absolutely should be and can be entertaining. And I hope that the students I have here find my classes entertaining. I hope I try to make them entertaining. I absolutely think it should be entertaining. But I think it is more than that. And this is something that TED Talks just misses. So here's the critique that against me, my talk, since I'm providing you my critique. So here's the response to what I'm saying that I think is sort of settling on everyone's mind in the background somewhere, which is that TED Talks makes knowledge accessible to everyone. It's available on the internet. We can all watch a TED Talk whenever we like and get a bite of information about something. And I do think there is really something to that. I think that is a valid response. What I think that misses is that the deep kind of knowledge that we're talking about, not the soundbited kind of knowledge, also ought to be available to everyone. So now we're coming back to where Yasmin ended at some level. Returning to the idea that knowledge requires huge amounts of work and time, it also requires huge amounts of public investment. It requires us rethinking our priorities societally in a way that really says, education and knowledge and research are things that change communities, that change the way that we pursue ideals, and that they aren't simple things. They are complicated things, and we are able to deal with that complexity together in a way that incorporates the use of everybody. TED Talks, the need for soundbiting of ideas and the idea of TED Talks for me has become a sign of just how many people are forced to settle for naive and utopian narratives in the place of having access to the kind of education and prospects that would allow them to really learn and allow them to really contribute. This fixation on the entertaining big idea also implies for me, and this is sort of an aside again, but I think it is an important aside, the fixation on the big idea suggests to me somehow that work doesn't matter. That we have what we want is to get the fun bit, the sort of exciting punchliney bit, not the effort. And that I think this really kind of undervalues something fundamental that is both challenging and deeply important. And I should add here that nobody knows more about work than basis students. That you guys know all about this. And my sense is that you would like that to be valued for what it is, that you don't only want to have to jump to the end, that you want that to be taken seriously, and so you should. And knowledge entails that. So, in essence, my critique is a pretty deep one, which is that the kind of popularity of TED Talks as a model has become a sign for me of the failure of our society to actually incorporate most people into the really essential part of the human endeavor. So to wrap up, I love that you guys are asking questions. I love that you're opening these questions. I love that you're curious. I love that most people are curious. I'm curious too. But if big ideas trademark is what we have to offer, then we really are failing. We need a really massive shift in our relationship to education towards a model that says that real education deserves tremendous investment and respect, and where, for example, the best and the brightest, like you guys, want to be teachers like me, where the process of engaging in knowledge is worth the work. We don't really need a utopian fantasy, which is what big ideas provide. What we need is the depth and work for better realities. Thank you.